Yes. Hello, folks out there in this room and hopefully online. I am Petuuche Gilbert. I am from New Mexico. I am from an indigenous community called Acama. And Petuuche is my birth name in Acama. And I'm with several organizations, and for one is Indigenous World Association, that's a United Nations NGO. Then the community where I live, we have a group called the Laguna Acama Coalition for a Safe Environment. And then there's a core group of the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. And the group that I'm really going to talk about today is called Affected Communities and Allies Working Group, which really focuses on nuclear colonialism. And that's what I'll be paying my attention to as we go through our conversation here together. Thank you.
Good day, y'all. Sio Tohiju, Jesse Ama Duhahawi. My name is Jesse Deerenwater. I'm from Oklahoma. I come from a community that's impacted by a uranium processing plant, the Kerr-McGee facility, where they mined uranium in the Southwest and brought it to there. I now live in Michigan in a reactor community and do work around nuclear power issues, and I'm with Cultural Survival and Crushing Colonialism on behalf of Craft Times, which is the media wing for my organization in Michigan, which is Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2.
Wado, thank you. I also realized that I neglected to say where I am from. So I was raised primarily in rural areas of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a little bit in West Texas and Abilene, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And so is my cousin Jesse here. So Petuuche, would you begin for us with a briefing of the nuclear landscape, just to help ground and educate us all on the topic?
Sure. You know, I worked on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples from beginning to end. And that was the early 1990s all the way till 2007. And, you know, the times that we were working there at the UN in Geneva, we never ever talked about the problem of uranium and nuclear affecting us. I and a person by the name of Charmaine Whiteface, who's from Lakota in South Dakota, we were both affected by uranium. Uranium mining had occurred from the development of the nuclear bomb in New Mexico in 1945, created there and tested there. And all those years, uranium was produced from the 1940s until the 1990s. So, but yet we never talked about it. But after the declaration was adopted, then when we came back home, mining had affected the lives and land of our people, and it still does today. So that's why today, when we talk about the nuclear landscape, we talk about everything along the nuclear fuel chain. And this is what's been neglected at the work that we're still doing on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is occurring this month from April the 27th for a month. And then the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That's also going on again here. So we've attended those meetings, what they call the meeting of the state parties that deal with nuclear weapons. And this is going to be the fourth meeting of the state parties in November. Those two huge international treaties neglect the front end of nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors, the uranium. They tend to concentrate solely on either weapons, the testing of weapons that have occurred from the 1940s all the way into 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s. And so we've been emphasizing you've got to pay attention to uranium and all the elements along this nuclear fuel chain. So once you take uranium out of the ground and you create the yellow cake, you have to enrich it, and in order to produce the power for both nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. And the ultimate end of what they call the spent fuel rods out of a nuclear reactor are spent fuel rods. And that's the biggest problem, is what do you do with the nuclear waste that's at the final end? Both very highly dangerous that have to be dealt with for thousands of years, billions of years really. And both in the nuclear waste from spent fuel rods, but you have to realize that nuclear waste also is uranium, the byproduct of uranium mines and mills. Those are uranium mill tailings that are still on the ground that affects the lands and lives of our people at home. There in New Mexico, where you had this 50 years of mining and milling, in the area that we call the Grants Mining Districts, there are 180 plus, now they refer to them as abandoned uranium mines, AUMs. Mainly because those companies that operated those mines, just neglected the oversight of continuing monitor of these sites. And now the state of New Mexico and the federal governments have to deal with these abandoned uranium mine sites. Of course, they're radioactive. Some of them, and in this area where I live, there were 5 nuclear radioactive uranium mill sites. And those also, they have mill tailings, those produce radon gas and other radioactive elements. And those have to be dealt with because, again, it causes cancers and it causes even radioactive environmental impacts to land, air, and water. So those are continuing radioactive matters that the federal government and the states have to deal with. And the final end about nuclear waste, the United States has, at one time, it had 104 nuclear reactors, most of them back east. And the problem is, what do you do with these spent fuel rods? Well, nobody wants them in their backyards of these nuclear reactors that Jesse will talk about. So they want to send them out to New Mexico and Texas. At one time, the United States was trying to develop this nuclear repository in Nevada, the Yucca Mountain site. And the state of Nevada didn't want it. So they finally, President Obama finally stopped funding for it. The problem is still there. So now they're saying, well, let's put it in communities like where there's just maybe barren land, open landscape, and they chose New Mexico and Texas. Fortunately, both states, passed laws opposing to these radioactive waste sites. So that's where it now stands. Of course, there are lawsuits that are developing over it, and the United States still needs a permanent repository for this nuclear waste storage. And now the term or the language that they're using is to try and entice states to accept these is both money, but also the term that they're using is consent-based siting. So they have to agree, local communities, like the state of New Mexico, local communities have to agree that they'll agree to accept these kinds of long-term radioactive sites. There is one there in New Mexico called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, but that handles what they call low-level radioactive waste termed transuranic. Those comes from, like, for example, plutonium pit productions that occur when you develop the nuclear triggers to set off a bomb, plutonium pits. And where they're being developed now is in Los Alamos National Laboratory and Savannah River Complex in Georgia, South Carolina. Okay.
Thank you so much, Petuuche, for giving us all of that information. That was incredibly helpful. Jesse, would you like to talk a bit about the nuclear landscape and its impacts on indigenous peoples and the lands.
Yeah. So I come from a community in Oklahoma. In my intro, I share a little bit the Sequoia Fuels uranium processing plant. They made lots of different things there, like fertilizers, like hexafluoride. They also made depleted uranium, which was used in war, Iraq specifically, and they made some other things for processes, but the things I remember were the depleted uranium and the hexafluoride. And so the hexafluoride they sprayed on cow fields because it makes the grass grow faster, and so that they have to feed the cows less or spend less money on that. And so in the area where I was at, Brahms is a fast food chain, and they were using that hexafluoride on their cows. And so it polluted the land, caused deformations in the. Is this thing still on? Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right. Sorry, I just couldn't hear myself. But it caused deformations in the cows, and then the depleted uranium was used in war in Iraq, where it caused mass devastation. The tanks, first the people were impacted by the weapons through. Now you can look at it, and there's like all kinds of like pictures and evidence of the deformities and stuff that it caused. But also the tanks and the things that fired the weapons and fired the shells were so radioactive that the United States and the military left them over there in just like a fenced off field, similar to that field that you showed me whenever we were by the Jack Pile mine that had all the old radioactive equipment in it when I was down there. And a similar thing, except for this was tanks and stuff. And so like, long story short is the nuclear issues impact indigenous people on indigenous lands. Uranium mines, where it's mined, people are exposed. You lose access to the land. You lose access to culture. It's a Superfund site there at the place where I come from in my home, and you can't fish or forage there, and they can't really fully clean it up, because if they do, they take a chance on busting open the barrier in between the waste burial and the Arkansas River, and it could pour into the Arkansas River and completely destroy things. And what they could clean up, they sent off to the White Mesa Mill, which is another indigenous community. And so I don't want to go too long on it, but that's just a little like quick thing. It's mined in indigenous lands, it's processed in indigenous communities, and there's like a footprint all across the country and all across the globe too, when you think of the bigger nuclear industry and production on different continents too. And then you end up with the reactors, which are usually in poorer black and brown and white working class communities where people can't really fight back. Most reactors are there, and so you have that pattern of taking advantage of like indigenous folks, but also poor folks everywhere you go. And then you have the waste, which they want to bring back to store on indigenous lands too. And so it's really just a bigger, wider picture. And I'd say at almost every single site, or if not every single site where nuclear productions are happening on indigenous lands, they need cleanup. And the government's not putting enough money into cleanup while they're putting exponential amounts of money into developing new nuclear and new nuclear bombs, which I could talk about a little bit later or something. So yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Listening to both of you speak, in particular Petuuche earlier, when you said that they were trying to put the nuclear waste on, quote, barren lands, it brought to mind for me how the European colonizers justified stealing our lands here in the so-called U.S., claiming that they were empty. So just lots of things going through my mind as I'm listening to you both. So let's talk a bit about the growth of nuclear energy, or at least what the industry is attempting to do. So there seems to be a resurgence of demand for nuclear energy, with mixed feelings being expressed by people across the so-called U.S. So, Jesse, where is this demand coming from? And is this a genuine need, or is this, a falsity created by the nuclear industry?
All right. Yeah, I can definitely speak towards that, and depends on who you're talking to how it depends on the answer you're going to get. But I can share a little bit about my story and the work that I do with the group Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2. So there in Michigan, probably around 2020 is when you really started hearing hardcore about needing nuclear to help fight climate change, to help reduce carbon, and then you begin to see climate and environmental groups begin to kind of split and part ways a little bit on if that's the answer or not. And so being in Michigan there and kind of being in the climate movement and the environmental justice movement, this wasn't really too much of a conversation at the moment, at that time. But knowing what I know from what I was, the impacts of of what I was raised with, this is intergenerational work for me. I'm like probably third generation second generation strong doing the nuclear, anti-nuclear stuff, and many generations in as indigenous resistance to colonialism. But So I knew instantly that nuclear could not be any kind of solution, because nuclear and humanity do not go hand in hand in my mind. And so that was where I first started hearing about the resurgence of nuclear and the ideas for it. And that was with the small modular nuclear reactors. And so we worked in our group to make sure that Michigan didn't start passing laws. We'll rewind a little bit. The state of Michigan wanted to use its manufacturing and shipping infrastructure in southeast Michigan, like Detroit area, to build small modular nuclear reactors and send them out into the world. And so we fought against that, and we're still trying to educate people on the dangers of historical nuclear before we go into new nuclear. And so fast forward a few years into about 2024. Then that's when the data center boom and the momentum around that started happening, and we started kind of doing the research into who owned the rights to the different types of reactors that would be built, the small modular reactor concepts, and most of them were subsidiaries of tech companies. These same tech companies like Microsoft, Google, Tesla, there's tons of them. They also have concepts for data centers. And so we started making the connection along with other people between the need for nuclear to cover data centers and the power that they'll need. And within that, we found out that the tech companies are buying up land near old reactors to potentially restart them, like the Palisades reactor and 3 Mile Island. And if you all are knowing about the data centers and how there's this boom for it, it's almost like they're saying that they're going to need so much energy after so much time, to power so many data centers, and the only thing that can do that in the long term, in the long run, is going to be these small modular nuclear reactors. And so in the past couple years is where we've seen another, I would say another way or pathway for them to try to get these small modular nuclear reactors, because none of them are built yet, especially here in America or in the United States. There's like 2 that are online in China. But the way that you hear the industry talk about it is that these small modular nuclear reactors are already here. They're already helping us. They're already powering our grid. They're already helping fight climate change and things like that. And so it's mostly a false demand to get the reactors because there's a lot of power and a lot of money that comes with it too. And so just to, I could talk about all this stuff like really in depth for a long time, and I'm trying to not do that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we could go on all day on this topic easily. So yeah, the AI data centers, Jesse and I actually co-wrote a piece together that's in the latest issue of Crushing Colonialism's publication, the magazine. And we talked about or reported on in the magazine about, this supposed demand for nuclear energy to power AI data centers. And, I think I'll add to that, part of what we're seeing, like where I live, so I live on Piscataway land in so-called Washington, D.C., and in Northern Virginia, we have the largest concentration of data centers in the world. And this is all to power AI, the big power AI stuff. And one of the things we're seeing, like I want to talk about this, is that the rates of our electricity, the prices have significantly increased. And the industry is sort of using that, I think, as an excuse of, well, we can bring the cost down. But also our electricity rates have gone up in order for the electricity companies to build bigger grids for AI. So, this is one more example of how all of this, I think, ties together and impacts our communities, including our urban natives. Over 71% of us in the so-called U.S. live in urban and suburban areas. So while our relatives in the rural lands are clearly impacted very heavily, so are our people in the cities. Yeah. So the 25th Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is focused primarily on the topic of Indigenous health. And so we have some of the highest rates per capita of any ethnic or racial group in the so-called U.S., as well as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and a host of other places I was able to find disability and indigeneity data from. So I want to hear from both of you about the health impacts of nuclear energy and related issues such as weapons testing and warfare, and the connections to colonization of indigenous peoples, our bodies, and our lands globally and locally. Mm-hmm. Petuuche, would you start off with that? Thank you.
Yes. People were so ingrained in money. So we want employment for in order to feed our families. We need the money. So when uranium mines are available, many of our indigenous peoples worked in the mines and in the mills. And of course, then as they worked decades in those both underground mines and in surface mines, they breathe in the radioactive ionizer radiation, and that affected their health. But also many people didn't realize that when the men brought home their clothing, then the women who washed their clothes also then impacted by the ionizer radiation from the clothes that they washed, so they became affected. So those are the health conditions today that even though mining has ceased for decades, the women who are pregnant, they did what they call a birth cohort study that the University of New Mexico was doing in the Redwater Rope Pond community around Church Rock community in New Mexico. Found that the pregnant women had radioactivity in their bodies, and then their children, the babies, then contain this same radioactive elements. And a scientist, Dr. Ian Ferrari, who does these kinds of scientific studies on radiation impacts, said that when it's in the babies' bodies, 50% likelihood in their lifetime they will get cancer. So many of our people now have cancers, whether it be thyroid cancers or lung cancers, some kind of bone cancers, all kinds of cancers. And people, even though mining has ceased, or even though the first atomic bomb testing occurred, that those people that are still live near the bomb sites we call themselves downwinders. So downwinders from both the 900 plus atomic bombs that were tested in Nevada are those people that are now affected, and they're now claiming Radiation Exposure Compensation Act monies for their health impacts. Or the same way in New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was tested in 1945. Those people are even today affected by cancers, and they're called the Tularosa downwinders. And all these people now are able to get some kind of compensation by the federal government, which is also term limited. If you apply for RICA compensation, you only have 2 years to apply for those funds. The federal government, didn't want to spend billions of dollars to compensate radioactive impacted victims. The same way with the people that live around national research laboratories. Like in New Mexico, you have 2 research laboratories that concentrate on weapons development: Los Alamos National Laboratory and Sandia National Research Laboratory. I've known some people that died because they were working in these places. One community called the San Ildefonso community, which is the neighbor to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, they are affected today by the plutonium productions that occur, or the tritium releases that occur, or all the other elements from radioactive production of weapons production then goes into the land, air, and water. And so the downstream people, which are the neighbors to Los Alamos, the San Ildefonso people, are affected today by the radioactive impacts. So we just have to really realize that all the forms of radioactivity that comes both from weapons and nuclear reactors are harmful. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission that says there is no safe dosage of ionizing radiation. So this is why the term that we apply and use, we are all radiation victims, either from atomic bomb testings or nuclear research laboratory activities, or even uranium mines and mills. Somehow, we're all radiation victims. And even they say like regular power plants that burn coal. Uranium is laced with coal. So when the coal is burned in power plants, those also spew radioactive materials. So again, these kinds of elements, spread all over the world. And this is why we're so opposed to all the elements along the nuclear fuel chain.
Thank you, Petuuche. That brought to mind, there's a piece in this issue of the magazine talking about France's history of testing nuclear bombs in Algeria in the Sahara Desert. The first bomb that they dropped was 70 kilogram tons of TNT and more powerful than the first one dropped in Hiroshima. And in the article, the person talked about, once again, France said, oh, the Sahara is empty, it's barren land. It's that continual, it's empty, we'll do what we want mindset. But the piece also talked about how, it's not just the issue of the Sahara or Algeria, because that toxic sand will blow in the air across different parts of northern Africa. So you're right, Petuuche, even if it's not directly in your backyard, it's still impacting so many. Yeah. Jesse, would you like to talk a bit about it?
I can share a little bit about reactor communities. So you can go to radiation.org, and there's a epidemiology study about that was done on the reactor community that's near me. And it said that before the reactor went online in 1985, that the cancer rates in that area were way below the national average. And once it went online, those numbers begin to grow up to now, to where I think it's 18% above the national average for cancer rates. And on there, they've done epidemiology studies at lots of places. They also do the Tooth Fairy project, where they get teeth from, or people voluntarily send baby teeth in. So bones are one of the places to where strontium and other things are stored. I think this one's strontium 97, or I don't remember the exact one, but it's stored in your bones. And so children lose teeth, and so the Tooth Fairy project is where they, the original one was a long time ago, and they found in the teeth, that these kids were exposed to radioactivity and the amount and the elements that were in them. And this is a new study around the reactor in my community, where they're doing the same thing, and we're pretty sure that they're going to find the same outcomes. Is that the people are impacted directly by the radiation from the reactor. And just one quick note on what I was talking about earlier with the weapons, the depleted uranium. Over in Iraq, there's like lots of studies about it, about the deformities, the cancers, and everything everyone has who are in those communities in those areas that were bombed by the depleted uranium shells. And so the health impacts from the weapons, whether it be the bombs, the nuclear bombs, or it be the depleted uranium shells, or any of the new technologies that they have, that like the thermobaric bombs, potentially are used with depleted uranium. A lot of that new weapons are proprietary information, so we don't know much about those. But we do know that they're just as dangerous as the old ones, and if not more. So that's what I can speak towards, pretty comfortably. Are those health impacts around reactors and from the weapons?
Let me just add about nuclear reactors that have been affected humans all over the world, being like in Fukushima and Chernobyl, those kinds of accidents, or even 3 Mile Islands, that the radiation, spreads all over. And like the Fukushima people, I was there in Hiroshima, I think it was 2015, and those communities had to be moved out. And the government, now has to deal with the radioactive water that have been stored in tanks, and because it takes up so much space, that they're having to then release all of this radioactive water into the ocean, and of course then that also spreads all over the world. But the same way with the radiation that went into the air, there was tests done in California that they were immediately soon after the damage at Fukushima that began to spread. So, or the Chernobyl is the same way. is dealt with on site, but the radioactive elements that sprayed up into the air then just really appear globally. And of course, we've said that about atomic bomb testing. And so that's why we're just have to be concerned about the radioactive impacts that occur from all everything along what we're saying along the nuclear fuel chain.
This brought to mind some research I did a while back, looking at connections of climate crisis, environmental destruction, disability, health, and indigeneity. And I found a study that it was actually done by the Australian government with no consultation with any Indigenous people, but they were trying to decipher if the high rates of cancer near some of the uranium mines that the Indigenous people were suffering from were related to the mining. And they in the end said no, it's because of they drink and smoke too much. It's not the uranium mines. Yeah. So, yeah, I felt like I needed to mention that because we do know this, just like we know near pipelines and other destructive projects, we have higher rates of autoimmune diseases. I myself have several, and I can't help but wonder maybe if I had not had Brahms ice cream as a child, or maybe if they just didn't contaminate the cows with nuclear waste, maybe I wouldn't have all these autoimmune diseases, you know?
Brahms is big, you know, people in Oklahoma love Brahms.
Yeah, we do love us some Brahms. So I have another question. I believe it was you, Petuuche. You mentioned RECA, the Radiation Exposure Contamination Act. Or Compensation Act, thank you. In listening to you both, it was kind of bringing to mind what I've heard from coal miners and their family members when they talk about black lung benefits, and that, you know, these benefits exist to help offset the cost of living with, you know, different lung issues because of coal mining. But what I heard from many people across West Virginia and Southwest Virginia was that the mining companies would go get the local doctors, you know, kind of buy them out, get them in their pocket, and then the doctors would not diagnose people with black lung, so they could not get the black lung benefits. What has it looked like? If you could speak a little bit more about getting the RECA benefits, what is that like for communities, and how does that impact their health and well-being?
Yes, you know, the federal government really hates to compensate the victims, any victims that they've caused. So in this case of uranium or nuclear damage done to the people, the United States, you know, did pass the first Radiation Exposure Compensation Act for miners, uranium miners. And so recently, this last one is called Post 71, the new bill that was enacted just a year ago. So the miners and millers, there's two sets of under this new radiation exposure compensation. One is for miners and millers, and the other one is for like what has been termed downwinders. Downwinders would be people that were affected by United States bomb tested in Nevada. So, for example, the limitation to the downwinders, you would have to live in, and there's only certain states throughout the United States, and you had to live in those particular states that are defined in the law between, like, say, the time of the bomb test in 1945 until 1961, that you have to live in those states in order to achieve some kind of compensation for downwinders. And so it becomes very bureaucratic. So today, you know, there are groups that are radiation exposure compensation groups that are helping local people through filling out these applications. The first round, you know, a lot of attorneys, you know, benefited because they could get compensation monies from those victims that they were supporting and gaining monies for them. I think even up to 10% or 25%. And they were as low as $50,000 annually. Now today you can get up to $100,000. And so these local groups are saying, you don't have to go to the lawyers to get some of these monies. We'll help you through this filing of the claims. But of course, you have to prove medically that you were affected by some kind of radioactivity. And so a doctor has to fill out forms that says, okay, we think that this person got radiation exposure by working in the mines and the mills. So you have to produce that kind of, well, where did you work, and when did you work at like uranium mining companies, and then apply for these compensations. And unfortunately, yeah, many of our people, men, and did get compensated, but ultimately they died. So yeah, you can get monetary benefits, and your families could use it, but ultimately, yeah, you paid a high price of dying for receiving this Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. So, and the other thing, again, I had said earlier, the government doesn't like to spend billions of dollars to compensate victims. So this current radiation exposure RECA bill and law now only applies, it was only for 2 years. So at the end of, let me see, 2026, it ends. So there's been some move to try and get that extended, and that the Congress didn't want to pass the first one or the second one, especially the second one. So now people are applying to try and get more extensions to compensate the victims, because this radiation is going to really last, in my mind, forever in the lifetime of people living there, because the radioactivity stays there for thousands of years. And even they say for uranium, it's into the billions of years for the radioactive half-life of this kind of radioactive elements. So as when the government is pushing for small modular nuclear reactors or more nuclear power plants, you're still going to then enhance and increase the amount of radioactive ionizing radiation that's going to affect all of us.
Speaking of the miners, that brought to mind just another form of work that some of our people do. We have a lot of Indigenous people in the so-called U.S. and Canada who serve in the military. And Audrey Huntley, who is a journalist up north in so-called Canada, her father served in the Canadian Army. And he, along with several other Indigenous men, were actually tested. They were basically lined up, told to turn their backs, and then bombs were exploded. And, years later, they all pay the price. They all died. And they weren't in war, but they were being tested on in that way. So with that,
Can I add a
yeah, please go ahead.
little note to it? So I go yearly with a group of people to go to Washington, D.C., the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, and we do some lobbying around RECA and other issues. But some of the things I heard from some of the folks that show up there is that, like Petuuche said, you get $100,000, but you're sick and you lose your life potentially, because of that, because of the stuff that it took to get that. But anyway, that $100,000, that's like 1 year, 2 years to support a family, or a person. And if a person's not able to work, because of the impacts on them, that $100,000 is not going to last long at all. And so it should be more. And it should be more. And so going back to do some more lobbying to try to get that extended this year, next month in May. So just add to that.
But let me also add, the United States, and of course the other nuclear armed state did a lot of bomb testing in the Pacific. But the one that's really just a terrible incident of the United States bomb testing is in the Marshall Islands. There were 67 atomic bomb testing over decades. And those people's lives and lands have been devastated and ruined. And these poor people there, of course, their fisheries or the produce of the land, is unable to be used. So many of these people have live in a diaspora type of situations. Many people left the communities and moved to places like Arkansas. And it's so very sad that the people cannot live on their homeland. And the people that are living there were actually tested by the government in secrecy. The women were producing, their babies. They were deformed, and all the people today still have all these radioactive health problems just by living today. And the government still, is still trying to deal with this problem, but yet there's still so much secrecy over the radioactive impacts upon the people there that need to continue to be studied. There's an excellent film that people should really see that Adam Horowitz shows. It's called Nuclear Savage, that talked about the 4.1 victims of the study that was done by the United States in secrecy over the damage done to the Republic of the Marshall Islands people there.
Thank you for that. I actually thought about the Marshall Islands earlier when you were both speaking about reproductive health related issues, which all of this conversation just shows how nuclear energy, warfare, and so forth is related to a whole host of issues and organizations and movement work and such. So I think I want to, since we have been talking about nuclear weaponry and bombs and such, I think I want to bring it kind of back here to DC, or sorry, New York City, and the Manhattan Project, and also the Shinkalobo mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Jesse, would you like to speak a little bit about the mine, or Petuuche? Yeah? Okay.
Is more versed on that.
I work with a group called, we use the word CCSA, the Congolese Civil Society of South Africa. Our group has been working with people in India, Japan, and the diaspora people are from the Congo. The first uranium that went into the making of the bomb, came from the Congo, and here it came to New York City at Staten Island. The Manhattan Project really began here, but ultimately then it was spread over different places like in Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, and then Los Alamos National Laboratory to create the bomb. So we've been having webinars, and actually we're having a meeting next in June the 10th there in Cape Town, again to explain that the uranium that came for the first bomb and came from the Congo. So the people there again are today still affected by the uranium mines. The government is much more secretive about trying to study that area of the impact upon the lives and miners of those indigenous peoples there in the Congo. So we've been having this, what I call the international discussions of people from Japan, where the bomb was used, to where uranium mine occurred in India, still occurs, and then the uranium mines that occurs throughout the countries in Africa, not only the Congo, in trying to again say that, okay, when you take the uranium out of the ground, you're going to have to deal with the radioactive waste. But then also these same countries have nuclear reactors. So the Coburg nuclear reactor in Cape Town, is also part of the discussions we're having. Because again, when you have these nuclear reactors, you have to dispose of the waste someplace. So those, I think, opposition to both the nuclear reactors, the relicense of nuclear reactors, because they're only maybe are licensed for 25 years, or maybe extended for another 25 years. The one in Coburg has been relicensed again for 25 more years. Still are going to be producing these kinds of nuclear spent fuel rods. Then they go up north to indigenous people's lands. So they have to deal not only with uranium process and waste, but now have to deal with the reactor spent fuel rods. So I think film makers do a lot to really show to the whole world about the dangers of the nuclear fuel chain. So the persons that we work, Sri Prakash from India, he has a film that shows the impact upon the people in India. That one is called Buddha Weeps. But and then he also came to New Mexico and did another film about impacts upon our people there in New Mexico. Sri Prakash, the English name is Footprints. That again, if you see the film, you'll see how the story of people's impacted by radioactivity. But let me also mention what we're doing here at the United Nations next week. We're showing 2 films about uranium impacts upon the Diné Navajo people there in New Mexico. It's called Demon Mineral. And I've put out some postcards there on the table. So if you want to see uranium impacts actually upon indigenous peoples, these aren't actors. These are the real people that have been affected by uranium. Come to see Demon Mineral. One is on April the 28th. That's across the street at the church center. And the other one's here inside the UN on April the 30th.
Well, we are at the end of our time. So, Wado, thank you to both of you, Petuuche and Jesse, for being up here and sharing all of yourselves and your knowledge with us. And to everyone here in the room and watching us online, and to Cultural Survival, of course, for letting us be here with you all. And please go to crushingcolonialism.org, subscribe to our newsletter. You can follow us on all the socials, and check out the magazine, or La Revista, as we do run it in Spanish. So thank you, everyone.